If you haven't watched the previous training video on absolute references, well, this one on mixed references is going to be mixed for you, pun intended. You may want to watch absolute so you have an idea of what I'm going to be talking about here, because a mixed reference is a combination of a relative reference and an absolute. So let's start from scratch. First off, what you're looking at here is the commission rates that I set for the areas north, south, east, and west for each quarter. And we want to multiply those commission rates by the total sales we have for each quarter. And that's how we're going to get our total commission for each area. So for the commission rate quarter one for area north, they get 12% of the total sales because they did okay, as opposed to west. Woohoo! They really worked hard, so they get a bigger chunk of a percentage of the total sales for quarter one. So to start, we want to figure the commission rate for the north. We're going to use a simple formula, hit the equals key on the keyboard to take the total sales for quarter one, and you can see it's commission for quarter one. So the total sales to multiply, and the symbol for multiplication is asterisk, so go ahead and type that in. And we want to multiply it by the percentage that they get of the total sales for quarter one. Select that cell, that's it, hit enter, we're done. But the problem that we run into if we're not inputting this and typing it in every single cell, which could be a little bit timely, as opposed to copying and pasting the formula, which we can go ahead and do by selecting the cell and hovering over the bottom right hand corner, and getting the black cross, the autofill handle, with a double click automatically copies and pastes the formula into the adjacent cells in that column, row by row. But we get a bunch of gobbledygook. So we've got 0, which, hey, that's not a good commission because 15% of $2.5 million is not 0. So what's happening is that when you double click on the cell, you can see that it's a relative reference. We have nothing to tell this formula to always stay in that row for this column. So when we go down one row, this also is relative and goes down a row. And so when you go down 2 rows, as we go down to east, then it goes down to com Q1 or commission for quarter one. So it's taking that, a combination of text and one number there, and multiplying it by 10%. What's the value of that? It can't compute multiplying text with a percentage. And so hit the escape key, double click, and you can see, and then it goes down for 17% multiplied by what's below that because we went down 3 rows. So it's going to go down 3 rows. Hit the escape key. Let's go back to the original cell here, double click. And what we need to do is we need to go ahead and tell it that for this reference, D6, to not make it relative, to always stay in that row. The column we don't care about because we're not copying it over to the next column or to the column in front of it, but just the row. So what we can do, as you recall in the previous training video, to add an absolute reference, just go ahead and click in front of the cell. And you can do it one of a couple of ways. You can either hit the F4 key and it adds the dollar signs for both the column and the row, which you don't need it for both. I mean, it doesn't hurt it if you put it in there as far as what we're doing right now, copying it row by row. So having a dollar sign or the absolute reference for D isn't going to make a difference. But if you hit the F4 key again, it toggles over to removing the reference from column D to row 6, F4 again, then it goes to column D but not row 6, F4 again, and it removes the absolutes completely from D6. So there's the toggle F4, but since I don't want to toggle through it, I just want to add the dollar sign quickly to row 6 so it doesn't update as I copy and paste down row by row. Then let's go ahead and just type in the dollar sign for 6, and that's it. Hit enter, and then when I come back up here, and I click or double click on the black cross in the lower right hand corner for that formula to quickly copy and paste it into all the adjacent cells down below, it works. Well, let's double check. Let's go ahead and randomly pick a cell here and double click on it to see if it's referencing the total sales for quarter one and multiplying it by the commission. Yes. So it's staying on that row, row 6. It doesn't update it as I copy and paste the formula down row by row. Cool. Let me hit the escape key to get back out of that. And then next, we want to go ahead and copy this formula and configure it for the sales in quarter 2, multiply it by the same commission, 12%, in quarter 3 and quarter 4. So if I hover over the lower right hand corner of that cell until I can see the black cross, and then I click and drag it over to the right and let go, what the fudge? What's happening? What are these pound symbols? The pound symbol represents a larger number that cannot be seen in that column. So instead of giving you a partial number, like let's say we couldn't see all these numbers, we could only see 3. Well, our total commission is $3. That's deceptive, right? So since it can't show you all of the number, it's not going to show you any part of it, so you're not deceived. So what you can do, if you want to see the number, well, you can hover over the cell and you can see in the pop-up, whew, that's a huge number. Or you can come up here to the right of that column header until you can see arrows pointing in opposite directions, and you can click and drag it until you can finally see the entire number, because Excel is not going to show you partial numbers because that's deceptive. Or better yet, if I click and drag it and push it back in, and then the shortcut for doing this is called the AutoFit, with the mouse hovered over in between those two column headers, but to the right of the column that you want to expand, double click really fast and it does a best fit or an AutoFit. It takes a cell that has the most content and fits the column to that. And so it stretches it out and we can see it there. Ooh, cool. I don't want to do that. Let's hit undo a couple of times so we can go back to about the size it was before, because that's not correct. Because if you take a look at it and double click within the cell, what's the reference? It's not taking the 12% over here and multiplying it by the sales in quarter two, is it? It's going to commission that we earned in quarter one and multiplying it by the sales in quarter two, in which case we bankrupt the company because they can't handle that big of a number. So what we have to do now is we have to tell it to stay in column C when we copy and paste it over column by column. And so we're looking at the reference D9, red to red here, right? And the name of the column is not D because that's the one that we're in. If we want it to stay in C, so when we copy and paste, it doesn't keep moving over and over. So when I hit the escape key and go to the last one to double click, because we moved over 3 columns, when we clicked and dragged it, it went over 3 as well. 1, 2, 3. Ugh. So let's hit the escape key. Let's go back to the original formula here and double click and add an absolute reference to the column C. So when we copy it over column by column, that $sign in front of the C tells Excel, do not move out of this cell here, or this column more specifically, when we copy and paste it over into the next column. So to do that, we'll go ahead and add a $sign in front of it, and that's it. Now, it's called mixed references is because we've got a $sign for one reference of the cell, which is referring to the column, and one without, which makes it relative. That is if we go down row by row, it'll update row by row. But since we're going over column by column, it's going to update it column by column, except that we added a $sign or an absolute reference that says don't do that. Stay in the same column. It doesn't hurt, again, to go ahead and do $signs for both if we're just going over column by column. But to get a little bit more particular, we'll just go ahead and add it to the C because that's the only thing we're focusing on, is to keep it in column C. So go ahead and hit enter and then select the cell that contains the correct formula now. And you can see up in the formula bar we have mixed references for D6, which means keep it on row 6 when we go down. So that makes sense because we're multiplying quarter one by all the percentages here. And when we go over column by column, keep it in the C column. Don't update it and move it over from 12% commission to multiply it by, well, the commission for quarter one. So hover over again the lower right hand corner until you can see the autofill handle. Click and drag it over to the right. Let go. Hey, that works. Fabulous. But wait, let's double check. Go ahead and double click inside of a cell and make sure that the commission rate for column 3 for area north is taking the cells for quarter 3 and multiplying it for the commission that's been assigned to the north, 12%. Cool. And hit enter. And so let's finish this up. If I go ahead and select the entire row here, and with that selection hover over the lower right hand corner to get the black cross and double click really fast. Cool. Now let's double check to make sure it's right. So we'll select a cell at random and double click. It looks good. For the east, we got the commission rate for the total cells of quarter 3 multiplied by it. That's going to give us what we want. Totally tinsel. As you recall in earlier training videos, I briefly introduced you to the autofill feature. Well, here it's all about autofill, so let's get started. The definition of autofill is that it's a quick way to copy the contents of a cell or a range of cells to adjacent cells. So if I come up here and I want to be able to copy that cell, I can only copy it to those cells that are adjacent to it, either up, down, left, or right. And to do that, just go ahead and hover over the bottom right-hand corner of the cell, that little green square, that when you hover over it, your white cross turns into a black cross. And we're not looking for the border of it because if you get a 4-way arrow, that means you can move the contents, not the actual autofill handle. You got to get the black cross. When you see it in the lower right-hand corner of any cell or range of cells that you have selected, then you can go ahead and click and drag to the right as far as you want, or even drag it to the left, and we'll go that way, and it copies it there, or with that selection, drag it down, and it copies down below. Ooh, we're just getting crazy. Let's go ahead and hit undo several times to undo all that. And as you recall in earlier training videos, not only does it copy the contents of the cell, but if the contents involve a function or formula, it'll actually copy that as well. So you can see in cell C12, up in the formula bar, we've got the formula that's adding up all these cells, well, the sales for each employee that they made in the month of January, and we wanted to go ahead and copy and paste it over into the next column so it can use the same formula. And when I say same formula, I mean adding one cell to another, but not exactly the same, because if it was, then it would be adding, as you can see up in this formula, the contents of column C. So it'd be C7, C8. But when you use the autofill feature, it uses what are called a relative reference by default. And we talked about that in earlier training videos about absolute, relative, and mixed references. So you may want to watch that. But what the autofill does is that, let me go ahead and delete this, is that when I have a cell selected and I want to copy the contents, the formula without having to type it in here again into the adjacent cell, again, the lower right-hand corner, get the black cross, click and drag it over and let go. And hey, does it copy the exact same formula? Not exactly where it copies the exact same reference, but it's relative to the new column that it's in. So when you look at this cell here to double check, double click on it, that formula isn't referencing the same column, but it updates it to the new column that we copied it over into. And so it updates it from C's to D's, D7 through D10. Cool. Hit the escape key to get back out of that. So it'll copy the contents and also functions and formulas. So you don't have to type it in again. But there's a warning with that, because if you need to stop it from advancing from one column to the next, but you want it to reference the same column or same cell, again, I refer you back to my absolute, relative, and mixed reference training videos. But the purpose here of the autofill is to be able to copy and paste contents from one cell to adjacent cells. And a shortcut for using the autofill handle is that, let me delete this, is that if you have one that's in a column, you can hover over the lower right-hand corner and double-click really fast, and it automatically fills it in for you. You don't have to click and drag it. Now that only works vertically, and by that I mean it works in a column from top to bottom. You can't go ahead and delete the contents above and then come down here and double-click, because it's not going to zip back up above. But you can click and drag so it goes back up above. That works. And then you can double-check to make sure it's referencing the totals here for this employee. Double-click in the cell. It's got the range for that employee. Checks out. Hit enter. Now after you use the autofill handle, it'll show you additional options in the tag, for example. Let me go ahead and change the formatting for the contents of the cell, lowest minimum, the minimum function, and come up here and add some color to it, make it bold, italics. And so if I go ahead and use the autofill feature for that cell by hovering over the lower right-hand corner, clicking and dragging it down, automatically copies it, right? But you also get the tag for the autofill options that you can click on to see if you want to tweak it. The default is to copy everything, or you can just say go ahead and fill formatting only. So if I do that, the formatting's there but not the contents. So if I type in something else, I get the same format as what it copied up above because that's what I chose. Let me go ahead and hit undo. So let's try it again. Click and drag it down and then click on the autofill options. And then if I do fill without formatting, it just copies the contents, but it doesn't have the formatting tied to it. And then last but not least is the flash fill, which we'll talk about in the next training video. Let me go ahead and click off. Oh, and while we're here and discussing about copying things, you can use the shortcut key Control-D if you want to copy the contents in the cell above. So in this cell, if you want to copy that, do Control-D, it duplicates it. I can also do it to the formula up above, Control-D, but then why am I doing that? Because when you double click on it, it doesn't do the entire range because it's a relative reference when I do that. And you can always click and drag to push it up and get the minimum, which is the same up above. But in any case, the point being is Control-D will copy the contents in the cell above it. Let me go ahead and delete all that. It can also be used to copy objects and shapes, which we'll talk about in a later training video. And then finally, it can also recognize patterns and copy the range that you set. So for example, we've got January, February, March, and April. What if I want to continue on to May? Sound kooky? Well, let's take a look. Go ahead and select the range to give something for the autofill to think about, to create a pattern on. So if we hover over the bottom right-hand corner for the selected range and we click and drag and go over to the right, you can see before I let go of the mouse, you get the pop-up that says May, June, July, August. Hey, that's pretty cool, right? Let me hit undo. You don't even have to do it for all 4 months. You just got to give something for it to go off of that's logical. You can do it for March and April. Well, click and drag to select March and April. And then click and drag its autofill handle, and it can pick out, okay, you're going to March to April. Now we'll go to May to June. Let's go ahead and undo that. Other things you can do, I mean, as far as really simplistic, we did the copy one cell into the next by clicking and dragging it, going down, down, down. Let me hit undo. You can also give it patterns like 1, 2. What comes after 2? We'll select the first 2. That's the pattern that the autofill needs to go off of. So when you click and drag it down, it can go 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Or better yet, delete that. We can give it a cookie pattern, something a little bit more complex, maybe 1. Enter 3. What comes after 3? Well, let's let it figure it out. Select the 2 cells to identify a pattern, then click and drag the autofill. Cool. And then you can click on its autofill options again if you just want to copy the cells or do the fill series. So it's finding a series of going 1 to 3, from 3 to 5, 5 to 7. So in other words, it's advancing every 2. And then you can just do fill formatting, fill without formatting, and then again flash fill, which we'll talk about in the next training video. It's like autofill, but it's a little bit more nitty-gritty when it comes to looking for patterns. And then one last one. How about if we did Q1? Is that enough to go off of? Well, let's see. Q1 is for quarter 1, right? So autofill it, go all the way down. Hey, it knows that game. Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 is 4 quarters in a year, and then it goes back to Q1. So again, there are some things that are automatically programmed into Excel. You just need to give it a little bit of a help to figure out what is you're trying to accomplish. And based typically upon a pattern that you can at least give it with 2 cells or more, it can do a pretty good job of figuring it out. The flash fill is part of the autofill feature, and if you recall in the previous training video, the autofill basically means if you want to copy a cell or range of cells after you select it, hover over the lower right hand corner over that green square until you can see the black cross, then you can just click and drag and it automatically copies over the contents therein. Or you can also select a range of cells that contain like months or numbers that you can click and drag it to create a series that Excel can pick up on and go, okay, you're doing the months of January, February, I know what comes next. If you use the autofill on those first 2 months, or even you could probably try just 1 month, Jan, hit enter, select Jan, click and drag down, hey, it knows how to automatically fill in the series. Well, again, the flash fill is part of the autofill feature, and to use it, you need to be next to a column of data that you want to change, or actually even several columns away, as long as it's within the same database range. So for example, I've got my databases here, and in order to use the flash fill in this example, I want to be able to bring over the last name, comma, space, first name, and not the middle initial. So if I go ahead and do it manually without the flash fill, I'd have to type it in every cell, and that can be annoying. But to use flash fill, I got to do a little work. I got to give flash fill something to work off of, or a pattern, so it knows not to include the middle initial in the middle column here. So first, I'll go ahead and type in last name, Klinger, comma, Max, hit enter, and then continue with Appleman. Oh, you see that? Flash fill automatically kicked in because by default it's turned on. So what it does is it says, hey, I can figure this out. I'll give you a preview of what's going to happen if you hit the enter key on the keyboard so you don't have to keep typing everybody's last name, comma, first. Well, actually, it didn't give me the pattern I want, and you want to double check this because when you look at it, I've got Appleman, Bob. This one says Appleman, Ob. That's not going to work. And then down below, Wiggums, Lancey, supposed to be Clancy. So the pattern that it's trying to figure out is by looking over in the middle initial column, and if it sees nothing there for some reason, it omits the first letter in the first name, and that's not going to work. So to overcome this, just keep typing the way you want it. So it'll be Appleman, comma, Bob, hit enter. And then let's go ahead and give it another one. So we have 3 in this pattern that hopefully will figure out exactly what we're looking for. Oh, okay, there we go. I think it figured it out. So now that we included B for Bob, it's not going to omit the first letter in the first name, like it also did for Wiggums Lancey, but now it's Clancy. So if you like what you see here and the pattern's correct, just go ahead and hit enter. Hey, wasn't that fast? Especially if you had over 100,000 rows. In any case, we've got it there for the flash fill. And you'll notice that you got the flash fill options. When you click on the drop down arrow, you can undo it, accept suggestion, and or select all 8 changes. So you know the changes that have been made if you want to keep track of it. I'm going to go ahead and click off. Now if the flash fill isn't turned on or you want to turn it off so it doesn't automatically keep doing this to you, then come up here, click on the File tab, go backstage, down to Options, select Advanced, and it's right there. Go ahead and check it or uncheck it. Automatically flash fill. And I'm going to click cancel. Now the next example is I want to be able to get the first name. So if I type in Max, hit enter, then Bob, oh, there we go. hit enter. Hey, that worked great. And then if I come over here for the last name, Klinger, hit enter, Apple. Ooh, fancy, hit enter. Now, I think it figures it out because when you type it in, it's looking at the delimiter, the space in between the first name and last name. And a delimiter is a character used to be able to separate your data. And so it looks like it's looking at that to be able to extract it and not also include the space, that delimiter in between the first and last name. And then finally, we've got the phone. Now, Flash Fill has numerous uses. I'm showing you just the basics to give you an idea of what it can do. And in this next example, I want to be able to put the phone number into a mask. In other words, I want to be able to put parentheses around the first 3 digits and then have dashes after the next 3 digits, but before the last 4. So if I go open parentheses, 515, again, I'm typing everything I see over to the left-hand side, but just trying to establish a pattern so Flash Fill can pick up on it, and I don't have to keep typing it in. And then I'll type in the same number that I see there, 548-4478. Hit enter. Let's go ahead and do it one more time to see if it can pick up. Oh, I just typed in the first parentheses and it says, I got it. Oh, what a good student. He knows the answer. And looking at it down below in the preview, it looks great. So hit enter. Fabulous. And if I just increase your productivity, send $2 to Happy Dude. That's me. One last thing, if it's not working for you, but you have it turned on and it's not for some reason picking up on your pattern, let me go ahead and delete that because we have the first 3 to establish the pattern. I'm just going to go ahead and click in the cell below the top 3. You can go ahead and hold down the Control key and hit the letter E key on the keyboard, and that's a shortcut for Flash Fill to take a look at what you got up above and what's over to the left-hand side and fill in the rest with the pattern. And if you don't like it, click on its options and say undo it, or you can delete it. Let's go ahead and undo that, or you can come up here and click on the Data tab, go to the Data Tools group, and it's there as well. And you can see in the pop-up it says Control E, the shortcut keys to automatically fill in values. And it says enter a couple examples you want as output and keep the active cell in the column you want filled in. So go ahead and click on that, fills it in. Beautiful. And then one more option that you can use. Let's go ahead and delete this again. And select the range and then hover over the lower right hand corner to click and drag it down. That's the autofill, but you get the autofill options. Click on the drop down arrow and convert it to Flash Fill. And hey, that looks good too. The text to columns feature is used to break up phrases or groups of words in a cell into their own cells. For example, we've got a cell here that has a group of words, last name, comma, first. If I want to go ahead and break it up and have last name in this column and then first name in that, well, can't do it over here because that column's in the way. So what I can do is I can go ahead and right-click on the column C header down below and insert, and there we go. Of course, if you want to leave it there, your last name, comma, first, and then have last name here, and then also have first name in that column, then of course you have to right-click on column D and insert it there as well. So you can extract it without overwriting that and keeping the original data. But let me go ahead and hit undo because I just want to go ahead and write over the name with the last name and then put the first name over in this column. So to do that, go ahead and select the range that you want to extract and put the text into a column and come up here and click on the Data tab. Go to the Data Tools group and it's right there. You can see when I hover over it, it says that it splits a single column of text into multiple columns. So let's go ahead and click on it to start it. Opens up the Convert Text to Column wizard. It's going to ask us a bunch of questions, and based upon our answers, it's going to spit something out for us, and hopefully it's what we're looking for. And what helps is by us answering the questions correctly. And down below, we got 2 types that best describes our data. Either it's separated the data, that is, within the cell by a delimiter, meaning a character that separates it like a comma or space or both. Or if you don't have anything separating it, but it's a fixed width, well, there's nothing fixed about it, but if it was the first 3 letters of the person's last name, and it was only the first 3, that would be fixed. So you can go ahead and select fixed, and then down below, click and drag this little tab that says, okay, the first 3. But let's keep it simple, and let's go with delimited. Characters such as commas or tabs that separate each field, and click next. Now what delimiter or character or characters is separating each field? It's not the tab. It's going to be the comma. Now take a look down below at the data preview. When I check comma, it puts a line in between the 2 columns, but it adds a space before the first name. Why? Because the delimiter comma comes before the space, so it puts the space in front of the first name. If you don't want the delimiter to be added in front of the first name, then go ahead and check space and say you have a combination of delimiters. So that way it collapses next to it and it doesn't insert it along with the first name. And you can use other delimiters. If you don't have spaces or commas, you can go ahead and check other and then type in whatever your character is, like if it's an ampersand. That separates your fields. So I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that, not use that. And then go ahead and click Next. In the final step, the screen lets you select each column and set the data format. This column format that I'm going to be breaking it up to is going to be general for each one, or I can say text. For this one, select that one and say it's also going to be text. So you can go ahead and get a little bit customizable down below and say, well, this one's text, that one's the date, or this one's going to be something else. I'm just going to go ahead and put it back to general for each column, which brings up a good point that down below you've got two destinations, and the destination begins in cell B5. So if you look at B5, that's the first cell in the selection that we had to convert this from text to columns. So what it's going to do is it's going to take the last name and overwrite what we have here, and then in the next column adjacent to it, it's going to take the first name and dump it right in there. So it looks good. Go ahead and click Finish. Cool. Now you may be thinking to yourself, hey, wait a second, in the last training video we learned about Flash Fill. Could that not work? Of course it could, but depending upon the structure of your database and exactly what you're trying to do, one may work better than the other. For example, if I go ahead and hit Undo, and I say, okay, I want to use Flash Fill, let me click in the cell next to it. Well, the problem with this is that it doesn't overwrite or get rid of this column here because I have to extract it first. So if I want this one to be last name, Klinger, hit Enter, and then Apple, oh, there we go, then hit Enter, it fills it in. So then I have to insert the next column, then extract the first name by using the Flash Fill. And then if I wanted to keep it, I guess that worked out well. But if I didn't, I wanted to overwrite it, it seems to me that the text to columns would work a lot more efficiently, or slicker, as it were. Otherwise, you can use the Flash Fill. Now if I go ahead and hit Undo because I've already have gone into Flash Fill, the undo is not going to bring back the text to columns, so I'll have to do it again, and I'll do it in a blink of an eye. There you go. See how fast that was? And then, of course, to identify this, we just say last name tab first name, or last and first. There's quite a few ways you can go about editing data within a cell. Like, for example, in the upper left-hand corner, we've got in cell A1, camping gear-US. You can see that it's bleeding over into cell B1. It's not actually in it, it's just because there's nothing there. So if I go into B1 and type in something like the number 0, hit Enter, it gets cut off. Let me go ahead and hit Undo. Or better yet, if you go ahead and select the cell, up in the formula bar, it displays the entire contents of the cell. When you go into cell B1, there's nothing in there. So if you want to edit a cell, there's a couple ways you can go about doing it. You can either double click to get the cursor flashing in the cell, in which case you can go ahead and select part of it and update it. And then when you're done, you can either hit Enter on the keyboard and it'll advance to the next row down below, or you can come up here and click on Enter and it stays within the same cell. Or if it works for you and you don't want to double click to edit within the cell, you can also come up here in the formula bar. Let me hit Enter. With the cell selected, just come up here and make your changes and go ahead and change it back to US. Also, a shortcut for overwriting a word is to go ahead and double click on it. It selects the entire word, and then you can type in whatever else you want to replace it. Sleeping gear. And if you don't want to accept your changes because you made a mistake, then you can just go ahead and hit the escape key or just click on the X to cancel those changes, and we're back to where we started. And then when it comes to deleting a cell or range of cells, you can go ahead and click and drag to select your range and hit the delete key on the keyboard. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Or another option is that up here on the Home tab to the editing group is that you get that little eraser, clear, click on the drop down arrow, and you get quite a few options. You can clear out everything, just nuke the cell. Or, as you can see, the other options are to clear formats, keep the contents, but just not the formatting, like, well, here we go, B for bold. Come up here, click on the drop down arrow and say clear the formats. Then we got something very skinny, and it's not bold. That's horrifying. Let's hit Undo and make it bold. And then the others, clear the contents, clear comments, or clear hyperlinks. And then finally, I want to show you how you can insert a symbol, like if you want to trademark or register something like camping gear, double click to get inside the cell, or you can come up here in the formula bar and just click after camping gear. And then to insert a symbol, come up here, click on the Insert tab, go over to the symbols, click on the drop down arrow, and select symbol. And then you've got your register right there, so you can go ahead and select it, or go with trademark and click on Insert, and there you can see it's right there. In addition, you got all these other ones that I've recently used, or you can click on the drop-down arrow and you can get some kooky ones by selecting different types of fonts for their symbols, or go down to wingdings and you got different caricatures here, a happy face or a straight face. You also have special characters if you want to take a look at that, not do a huge search, especially when it comes to maybe things like copyright or registered, or there's the trademark again. You can go ahead and click on Insert. And we get the 2 TMs, we just need one, close out. And then you can either click in front of it and hit the backspace key, or be behind it and hit the delete key, and it deletes what's in front of the cursor as opposed to what's behind it with the backspace key. And then to accept it, hit enter, we're good. Another way to edit your data, like if somebody's reading a bunch of numbers back to you, and let's say it's just for this range here, January through April, because we have updates and these aren't the real numbers, you can go ahead and select the range. And notice that the first cell in the range is in white. That's the active cell. So I can move within the range by hitting either the Enter key, and it moves it down row by row in the same column until it gets to the end, and then it goes to the next column row by row. Or you can advance column by column by hitting the Tab key, or going back column by column by holding down the Shift key and hitting Tab at the same time. So let's go ahead and reselect this so I don't have to do Shift Tab to get all the way back to the beginning of the cell. So in the active cell, when I type in a number and hit enter, it goes down to the next row in the same column. So somebody can read the numbers off to me, and I can just go ahead and type in those numbers. When I get to the end, I don't have to go ahead and move my mouse to click in the next cell. For the month of February, up at the top, it just automatically advances for me. Or if they're reading again from January to February for this employee ID, then I go ahead and Shift Tab to go back to that, and then go ahead and type in my numbers, hit the Tab key to advance from month to month, and then when I hit Tab, it goes down to the next row and continue on going from one column to the next. And then if I made a mistake, hold down the Shift key to tab backwards, and then make your change, and then continue on. When I talk about editing cells, columns, and rows, what I'm going to show you here is how you can insert and delete columns, rows, and also a range of cells. For example, if I want to insert a column, like maybe a column before column A, just go ahead and right-click on any column header, and in the shortcut menu, go down and click on Insert. It inserts a new column and it shifts everything that was in that column previously over to the next, and then what was in that one goes over to the next, and so on. And so everybody gets shifted over to the next column. You can also do multiple inserts. So for example, if I want to insert 3 columns at once, then just go ahead and click and drag to select 3 columns, and then right-click on any one of those column headers in the selection, like column C, right-click, go down to Insert, and it inserts 3 additional columns. So I have a total of 4 columns that I inserted that it pushed everything over 4 times. And you can also delete it with the right-click. So if I come up here and right-click on the selection, delete, there goes the 3 columns. You can also do it up here on the Home tab in the Cells group, and you've got your insert and delete. So for delete, click on the drop-down arrow and you can do columns. You can also do cells, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. But right now, if I delete the columns, what columns do I have selected? Ooh, that's not good. So go ahead and click anywhere within the column A, to delete that column. That is, if you want to do it this way, you don't have to select the entire column. Just click within the column and then come back up here to the cells group, click on delete by column. And we're back to where we started. You can also insert and delete rows. So if I go ahead and click and drag, and I have a total of 4 rows selected, I can of course go ahead and right click to insert it, or come up here in the cells group, click on the insert drop down arrow and say you want to insert sheet rows. So as many as I had selected, it inserts those 4 additional rows and pushes everything in that selection down 4. And then of course right click to delete. We're back to where we started. Now another way to do this, if you're not going to be doing it by columns or rows because you don't want to shift everything over, just a range of cells, like for example I want to budge this range over maybe a column or 2, but I don't want to insert an entire column because maybe I have data below that also gets pushed over and I don't want to push that over, just this range. Well, you can go ahead and select it and hover over the border and click and drag it over. You can do it that way, or you can select the range of the rows in front of it that you want to shift over. So a total of 6 rows that matches what I see over to the right that I want to push over a column, and right click that selection and go down to Insert. And for the insert, you can shift the cells either to the right, which means when I insert these 6 cells, it'll take everything and shift it over one. So what's here goes over here, and what's here goes over there, and it keeps doing that all the way over to the last column in the spreadsheet. Or you get the other option, you can shift it down. So it'll shift these cells, a total of 6 rows, down 6. And of course you get the entire row and columns. So if I do entire row and I click Okie dokie, it inserts 6 rows. Let's go ahead and undo that and try it again. Right click, insert, and shift them over to the right, click Okie dokie, and it just shifts the range for those rows over to the right. It doesn't shift what's below it, so if I had any text below it, it stays there in column H. Just what I have selected here gets pushed over to make way for what was here that I wanted to insert, and then what was here goes over here, what was here goes over there, and so on. And by the same token, you can also go ahead and select the range if you want to pull this over. You don't want to click and drag to select it, to hover over the border to click and drag it over, because sometimes clicking and dragging is a drag, especially if you have a lot of data, when it's just easier to go ahead and select a small range and right click on it and say to bring it over, we'll just delete the extra empty space or cell range here. And you can see that you got 2 options. You can shift the cells to the left, meaning that it's going to clear this out and pull this over one, and what's over here gets pulled over one, so it gets shifted to the left. Or you can shift them up by deleting what's below. So if I go ahead and say shift up, it's going to take the 6 cells down below in that column and pull them up. And then below those 6 cells will be pulled up, and so on, without pulling up the entire rows or deleting entire rows. And of course, you can also delete entire rows and entire columns. Now, if you notice, there's a pattern here. When it comes to inserting a range of cells, it does it over to the right and down. When it comes to deleting, you get the option to shift the cells up or to the left. So think of it this way. When it comes to inserting, you've got more room over to the right and down because you have tons more columns and rows than when you start shrinking your database by pulling it in up and to the left until you get to the upper left-hand corner. So let's go ahead and go with shift cells to the left. So we click Okie dokie, it clears that out and pulls everything over one to the left of the other one. If you want to look up some data within a worksheet or your workbook for that matter, but you have a lot of data to go through, go ahead and use the Find feature, and it can be found up here on the Home tab in the Editing group, and there it is, the big magnifying glass. Click on the drop-down arrow, and it's right there, Find. Click on it. There you go. Or close out of it, you can use the shortcut keys Control F. Now with it open, you can go ahead and type in what you want to look for. Like let's say we want to look for 475. So type it in 475 and then click Find Next, or because the button is highlighted, just hit Enter and it goes to the first instance of it. And then click Find Next and it goes to the next one. If you want to find all of them, go ahead and click on Find All. Let me click and drag the title bar of the window up, and then come down here and hover over the bottom border of the window so you get a 2-way arrow pointing up and down. That way we can click and drag to expand it, and there's everything that has 475 on sheet 1. Now if I want to go ahead and replace what I have here, 475s with 450, then come up here and click on the Replace tab and go down into the Replace with field and type in 450. And then you can go ahead and click Replace. And notice whatever cell it was in, it replaced it. You can see the value over here, D6, then it moved on to the next cell, which is D7. Click Replace, it replaces that with 450, goes to E7, and if you don't want to keep clicking on Replace, 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 go ahead and click on Replace All, and a total of 5 replacements were made after we made the initial first 2 replacements, and then click OK. Let's go ahead and delete that, so that way if we want to find all the 450s, type in 450, and click on Find All. It lists them all there, but what about anywhere else in the entire workbook? Let's go ahead and close out. Let's go to sheet 2. Hey, there's a 450, so let's go back to sheet 1 and do Control F, and then go ahead and click on Find All. Click and drag the title bar, expand the bottom, and to be able to search the entire workbook and not just everything that's on sheet 1, we need to go ahead and expand the options. And it's right there. We need to change the search from within the sheet to the entire workbook. Click Find All. Hey, there he is. Sheet 2. Click on it, takes you right to it. Want to advance to any others? Go ahead and click on it, takes you right to it. In this case, cell E7. You got a lot of other options, not only searching within the workbook worksheet. You can also search by rows, by columns, look in formulas, values, comments. match it so it's the exact case, either uppercase, lowercase, or the entire cell contents. You also get the formatting options. So if I'm looking for 450, but it has a specific format applied to it, then I can click on the drop-down arrow and say, let me set the format. Click on it, opens up the Find Format window, and you can say the format I'm looking for is in currency, the alignment is maybe horizontal, this alignment, the border, the fill. Let's do the font. And let's say we're looking for something bold. Click Okie dokie, and you can see a preview of it, a format with the text preview is in bold. So if I go ahead and click Find All, it didn't find anything. And what it didn't find is it didn't find any number with 450 that was in bold. So if I go ahead and delete that and say just find anything that's bold and click Find All, it did. Hey, you can see right there is the camping gear, US and the UK. And I can click and toggle in between the two by using the links down below. Now this is important because if you go ahead and you close the options and you're thinking, oh, let me go ahead and find 450, and you type in 450 and click Find All, it can't find any. So you may be like, oh, what the fudge, what's going on? You want to expand the options to make sure that you clear the formatting that's been currently applied to the search. So click on the drop down arrow and say that you want to clear Find Format. So you're back to 0. So when you click on Find All, it'll find everything, well, within the workbook that doesn't have any formatting applied to it or that we set to search for it. Then the other option that you get, let me go ahead and close out, is let me set that cell to make it red and also this one to be in red, and click out of there and do Control F. Is that if you have a cell that has a bunch of formats applied to it, you know, it's kind of a pain to click on the drop down arrow and choose format and then say, okay, I'm looking for it to be in bold, also for this number it's got to be in currency, for that alignment. That's annoying. What you can do as a shortcut is to click on the format drop down arrow and say that you want to choose all formatting that has been applied to a single cell. That makes it a lot easier, doesn't it? Go ahead and click on it, and when you do that, it collapses and disappears, and you get a little plus sign. That means it's in selection mode, and you get that little dropper over to the right of it, meaning that it wants to take a sample of that cell by sucking it up into the dropper, whatever cell that you select. So if I go ahead and select that cell, it pops it open, pulls out all the formats that have been applied to that cell, which is just one, red. So that way, when I go ahead looking for what, 450 that has red applied to it, and I click on Find All, it only found one. It doesn't find the other one because we're looking for 450. But if I want to go ahead and clear this out and say just find anything that has red applied to it or that formatting that we pulled from that cell, which could be more than just red, depending upon, I guess, as an indicator, the preview, then click on Find All, and it found both of them, the 450 and the 500. And then again, be sure that when you're done to clear it, because when you close out of here and you try to do another search and you didn't clear it, you'll think that you don't have anything within your workbook or worksheet, depending upon where you're looking. And that could be not good, especially if it's something really important that you're looking for. So click on the drop down arrow, clear it, and then go ahead and close out. So next time you do Control F, there's no format set to it. Even with the options being collapsed, you don't have to worry about it. But you may want to double check when you do your search if you do this a lot. I've done it sometimes where I forgot to clear it and I'm like, oh, good gravy. The Go To feature is just like it sounds. You can quickly get to a cell by using this feature. And to pull it up, come up here on the Home tab, go to the Editing group, click on Find and Select, and it's right there, Go To. You can see that when I hover over it, it gives you the pop-up. Also gives you the shortcut keys Control G. So you can do Control G or click on Go To, or better yet, let me close out. You can hit the F5 key on the keyboard and it brings up the same window. So if I want to go to a cell, I can come down here and reference the cell. Like if I want to go to Z2000, type in Z2000, and before I click OK and it takes me to it, notice the cell that I'm coming from, it's A3, so when I click Okie dokie, takes me right to it, but when I hit F5 again, it remembers where I came from. Cool. So go ahead and select it, click OK, and hey, we're right back. Well, if I scroll up a couple of rows, now I can see everything. We're right back where we started. Now you could say, well, can I just come up here in the name box and say I want to go to cell C2 and hit enter? Yes, but there are other features that you can use when using the Go To feature. That's just to give you the basics. For example, when you hit the F5 key on the keyboard, it remembers where you've been. So we were in A3, then we went to Z2000, and now we went over to C2. So if I click OK and I go to B5 and I hit F5, it remembers where I went, which was C2, and so it can keep track of it, but also it'll list all the named ranges or named cells that we have within our workbook. For example, what is a named range or cell? I talk about this in a later training video, but for the sake of this exercise, to see it listed in the Go-To window, I'm going to go over it just a little bit. By default, any cell that you select has got its own name, and this one is G5. Well, you can come up here in the name box and say, well, let me give it a new name. In fact, let's do it for commission, because when I want to get to the commission cell, I'm not going to really reference it by F3, but I can remember commission. So I can come up here and click in F3 and type in COMM to overwrite it, and then underscore, and let's call it commission 1 because I have a second cell over here that has commission as well, so we'll call it COM1 and COM2. And then when I'm done typing it, and make sure you don't have any spaces because it doesn't like spaces, hit enter on the keyboard and it accepts it. So now the cell has a new name. Well, it doesn't forget the old because you can always come up in here and type in F3 and hit enter, it takes you right to it, or when I click off of it, click on the drop down arrow and select COM1. Or you can hit the F5 key on the keyboard and guess what it lists as well? It lists any cells that have a new name or a range that has a new name. And we'll cover that a bit more in a later training video, but again, for the sake of this exercise, I wanted to make sure that you understand that when you look at this, you're like, what the heck is that? That's not a cell reference, that's a name. Well, it is referencing a cell, but by a name that you or somebody else gave it, or a range of cells. And then finally, you've got something special. Go ahead and click on that. And you can select all the comments that are in the workbook, the constants, the formulas. And if I go ahead and say for the formulas, I want all those that contain numbers, text, logicals, errors, click okie dokie. Hey, look at that. It selected every single cell that has a formula in it. So if I want to go ahead and do a quick update and identify those formulas by formatting them, like let's say in bold, isn't that a lot faster than me trying to go ahead and click and drag and select these ranges and then come up here? Just hit F5 and say that you want to select formulas. Oh, and don't forget, if you want to be able to see those cells, the formulas they're in and not the results of them, you got Control tilde. It expands it and shows the contents or the formulas in the cells. So that way you can see that these cells that I had selected through F5 actually are cells that contain formulas in them. And then to hide it, Control tilde again, and it collapses. The Transpose Data feature can take a range of data and flip it. For example, if I have a range of data here that has labels in the columns and I want them to be for now the rows, then after you select the range, go ahead and right-click on the range and go down to Copy. And then to flip it, you're going to flip it when you paste it. And so to do that, go ahead and select a cell, and then the column labels will now be the row labels down below. But when you right-click, you get the different paste options. We're looking at this one right here. That's called Transpose. And you can see the icon. It's got it on its side, then it's being flipped up to the column, or on the column being flipped down to its side. And with me hovering over it, it gives you a preview of it down below. So if you like it, go ahead and click on it, and hey, there we go. Isn't that cool? And vice versa. You can also go ahead and select this, right-click on it, then copy it, and then find another cell, right-click on it, and then go to the Paste Transpose option, let it go, and great. Now it works for values, but not really well for functions, if at all. So for example, if I want to take the two labels here with the corresponding functions, as you can see when I select in that cell, it's got that range that it's adding up, or that formula adding up that range. And I go ahead and select it, and I right-click to copy it, and I come over here, and I want it to be column labels now instead of row labels. When I right-click and I go to Transpose and click on it, it's like, what the heck? This number right here should be transposed with that number right there, but when you double-click on it, notice how, wow, it jumped way down below here. Ooh, that's just crazy. I mean, you can go ahead and click on the border and say, no, you're supposed to be transposing the data. That is, oh, see, now I have to go ahead and double click on it up here by clicking and dragging. I mean, you could do it that way, but that's annoying. Like I said, it doesn't work well with functions at all. And then there's the correct number. And it works even worse with more complex functions. Well, this one's a simple formula. When you come down here, as far as this goes, when you use the through method, it's not even going to copy over. For example, when I select the range here and right-click on that and go to Copy, I come down here and right-click and select the cell and right-click on it to go to Transpose. Wow, let's take a look. Double-click. Okay, it's jumping down, and wow, I really got to go ahead and figure this out how I want it done. So to keep it simple, unless you want to fight it with the functions, just transpose simple data, no formulas or functions, to either have the labels from the side to the top or from the top to the side. Now when it comes to adjusting your columns or rows, like if you want to be able to make it narrower or wider, just go ahead, like for example, in these two columns, hover to the right of the column that you want to adjust. And so if I want to adjust column A, then go to the right of it, column B, go to the right of that. And when you're to the right of it, you can see you got arrows pointing in opposite directions. Then go ahead and click, and you can see in the pop-up it gives you the size of it. Right now it's 11.71, or in pixels, 87 pixels. So you can click and drag and expand it or go in. And you can also do that for the rows by, let's go ahead and hover in between these two rows. You can click and drag to expand it or click to drag it in. Now you can do it that way, or you can come up here on the Home tab to the Cells group, click on Format, and you can go down and adjust the row height if you don't want to do it visually, but actually numerically by typing in numbers. Like for this row height, select it and say it's got to be exactly 12 and not 0.75, click Okie dokie, and it closes it up just a little bit. Or better yet, you can simply right-click on the row or column header and go down to column width and then type it in there. So we can delete that and say 20, hit enter, and that looks pretty good. And another thing that you may want to consider is that if I click and drag this in and I want to get it to do what's called a best fit, to go to the longest text or data within that column, then instead of clicking and dragging trying to get right to it, just go ahead and hover in between the two column headers to the right of the column that you want to adjust and double click really fast. Or if you're not good at double clicking, let me go ahead and hit undo. You can come up here on the Home tab, again to the Cells group, click on the Format drop down arrow, and you can do an auto fit for the row height, which means it looks at that row and looks and sees which cell has the highest content in it and says that all the cells in that row has to be exactly that height. Or you can do an auto fit column width. So it takes, in this case, cell A1, which has the most text in it out of all the other cells. Camping Gear USA, when I do an auto fit, does the same thing as if you double clicked in between the two column headers. Now that works for multiple selections. So if I go ahead and click and drag and select these rows and I hover in between any of those rows that are selected and click and drag, it does it for all the rows. Or let me go ahead and hit undo. Or right click the selection and say the row height is going to be 20. Hit enter. It does it for all the selected rows. I'm going to go ahead and hit undo. You can also hide your columns and rows. For example, if during a presentation I don't want them to see column F, or maybe I don't want to focus on it right now, go ahead and right-click on the column header label F and go down to Hide. And you'll notice that it goes from E and it jumps to G. So you know something's missing here if you know your alphabet. But I'll show you in just a minute how you can go ahead and unhide it. Let's go do some rows. So we can go ahead and click and drag a range as well and right-click on that range and say Hide. Hides it as well, and you can see it goes from 9 down to 14. So something, when I click off, that's not too obvious, ought to be obvious when you're doing your numbers, and going from 9 to 14 doesn't make sense. So to unhide your rows or columns, you can't just right-click on it and say unhide, because if you do that, it's not going to unhide it because it's hidden in between these two columns. So to get it to unhide between the two, you have to select the two that the column is hidden between. And then go ahead and right-click on the selection up at the top and go down to unhide, and it hides what's in between. And so we'll have to go from 9 down to 14. So we can right-click and unhide what's in between as well. And then as a side note, if you want to hide your sheets, because maybe you don't want to focus on them or don't want anybody else to focus on them, you can right-click on sheet 1 and say hide, and it's gone. If you right-click on another sheet, you can unhide, and it brings up what's hidden. So if you want sheet 1, go ahead and select it and click Okie dokie. Now another way to do this, if you have all the sheets hidden, you can come up here and click on the View tab. You get the option as well to hide. In this case, it hides the entire workbook, and if it's already hidden, then just click Unhide. And we want to unhide the entire workbook, adjust columns, rows, and say Okie dokie, and back to where we started. Now to spell check your worksheet, just come up here, click on the Review tab, go to the Proofing group, and it's right there. You can see when I hover over it, the shortcut key is F7. So either click on it or hit the F7 key, and it brings up the spelling window. And the first thing that it finds is Dreamforce. it's not in the dictionary and it thinks it's spelled wrong, and it suggests that you have dream space force. If my spelling's correct and I like it the way I have it, I can go ahead and click add to the dictionary, and then it moves on to the next misspelled word, which is Ebuary. And you can see Ebuary is not in the dictionary. I can go ahead and add it, or I can use one of the suggestions, February. That sounds good. Click change. And then when it's done, it says, hey, you're good to go. Oh, that was nice. Click OK. And then if I made a mistake, like, oh, wait, I added that to the dictionary. I don't want it to be added to the dictionary. I want it to be misspelled unless it has a space in between dream and force. Then go ahead and click on the File tab, go down to Options, select Proofing, and go down and click on Custom Dictionaries, and it's right there. Just go ahead and click on Edit Word List. Ooh, we got quite a few things in here, the least of which is Dreamforce. Go ahead and delete it. Of course, if you want to add it back in, you can do it here as well, Dreamforce, and click Add. But we're going to go ahead and delete it and click OK, click OK, click OK. So when I hit the F7 key on the keyboard, it starts where the cell is currently selected, and it says, okay, we checked from that point down at the bottom. You want to start at the beginning? Say yes. And then it finds Dreamforce because it's not in the dictionary. Remember, we removed it. So I can either go ahead and just say ignore it, or add it to the dictionary again, or go ahead and change it. We'll just say ignore once. Ignore once means that if you had it also throughout the rest of the worksheet, it would ignore it this once but get all the others. Or you can say ignore all, and it will ignore all of it. But for right now, we're good to go. The two features I want to cover here are the Smart Lookup and Thesaurus. A thesaurus is used to look up synonyms, or another word that's synonymous with the word that you're looking up. In other words, you want to say the same thing but by using a different word, because you may lose the comprehension of your audience if you keep saying the same thing or using the same word over and over again. For example, I'm looking at commission. I want to find out what other words I can use that mean the same thing. To do that, come up here and click on the Review tab, go to the Proofing group, and there it is, Thesaurus. You can see when I hover over it, it says at a loss for words. Let us suggest another way to say what you mean. All right. So with the cell selected of the word that I want to look up, go ahead and click on it. Opens up the task pane, Thesaurus, and it gives us some options here. Let's see if we can find one that means the same thing. To earn a commission, a command, a directive. Okay, not finding it so far. A fee, a payment, maybe. In any case, when you find what you're looking for and you want to replace it with that word, with the word that's in your cell, then just go ahead and hover over it. You can click on the drop-down arrow, or you can right-click on it. Gives you the same shortcut menu. You can insert it. Well, inserts it over the word there, or let me go ahead and hit undo because I don't want to do that. Or you can right-click on it and copy it and come over here, select a cell, right-click on that, and paste it. That works as well. Go ahead and close out of here. Next, let me scroll back. Let's do the Smart Lookup. So again, find a cell that contains a word in it and select it. And then come up here on the Review tab in the Insights group and do Smart Lookup. Brings up the Insight task pane, and you get the Explore option and the definition or defining that word. First of all, the Explorer actually defines the word, but it goes into it a little bit more in depth down below because it wants to explore in other areas besides the definition, like explore Wikipedia, the Commission, 9/11, Web Search, Utah County Commission. Oh, there's a lot of different commissions, but if you just want to define it, go ahead and click on that to get a bit more detail than what you have on the Explorer up at the top. Here you can see it as a noun, and then just go ahead and scroll down as a verb. Cool. Now, if I close out of that and I want to do it to a cell that contains more than a word, how's it going to handle it? Not very well, so just basically do it to cells that have a single word in it. And that also goes for the Thesaurus as well as the Smart Lookup. You can also right-click on the cell and go down to Smart Lookup. Brings up the task pane. And what is it looking for? REI. What's that? Is it looking for camping or gear or US? So if I select define, I can't find anything, but back to explore. Found camping, and it looks like it's doing okay because it's got camping gears, so it's trying to do the best it can with everything in that cell, but it can't define it because there's too many words in that cell. So it's not as smart as I thought. To format the text within your worksheet, it's really simplistic, and the reason why you want to do it is to make it pop out, make it look more organized. For example, the title of this worksheet, or rather the database here, is camping gear. I mean, that pops out. That tells me, hey, that's the focus of what we're working on here is camping gear. I could put sales of camping gear in the US, but that's good enough for me right now. And if you want to go ahead and make others pop out, like the months here for the labels on the columns and the labels for the rows, go ahead and click and drag to select it, and then hold down the Control key to click and drag to select the row labels. And then you can format this one of a few ways. Either come up here on the Home tab to the font group and make it bold. That's nice. Or you can right-click on the selection, and in the mini formatting toolbar up at the top, you can deselect B for bold. Or you can come up here on the Home tab to the font group and click its expandable dialog box button, and it opens up the Format Cells window, and you're on the Font tab. So you can change it to a different type of font, make it bold here if you like, even a different font size. Let's do that, bold, and say OK. See how it looks? Okay, it's a little bit too much for me. So if you don't have the undo option and you don't want to find out what format's been applied to it, so you can deselect it, like, okay, I need to deselect bold, but also change it from 12 back to 10. If you got a lot of formatting applied to it, probably the best way is to clear the formatting. You can do that by coming up here on the Home tab to the Editing group, and you get the eraser, click on the drop-down arrow, and say for the selection you just want to clear all formats. Click on it, we're back to where we started. Now, if you want to select the entire worksheet so you can update all the text, including the numbers, to a different type of font or make it bold, italics, you can do it one of a few ways. You can either come up here and in between the column header A and the row header 1, that little blank square there, click on it and it selects the entire worksheet. Then you can come up here and do B for bold. Okay, it unbolds whatever is bold, but when you click on B for bold, it bolds everything. Let me hit undo because I want to go back to just the title of the database, Camping Gear, in bold. Or you can go ahead and click off in a blank area and do Control A. It does the same thing. Now I say to click off in a blank area because if you're within one of the mini databases here that has adjacent cells that are filled in, if you do Control A, hey, guess what? We just learned how to go ahead and select a range that has adjacent cells. So like if I do Control A for the labels there, for each column, fabulous. And if I do it for this mini database, Control A, great. That one, Control A, hey, it knows what it's doing. Nice. I'll give you one more little tidbit here that you may find helpful. Let me click and drag and select range. You can go ahead and right click on the selection and go down to Format Cells. It brings up the Format Cells window on the Font tab. You can do it that way, or come up here on the Home tab to the Cells group, click on the Format drop down arrow, go down to Format Cells, brings up the same window. So we've got the Font tab, but you also have other tabs you can format, not just the text, but actually the border of the cell. You can fill in the cell. We'll talk about protection later, or we can do alignment. So for example, if we want to go ahead and change the alignment to go up to maybe, well, if it's 54 degrees and you're trying to get 45 exactly, you can't quite do it with clicking and dragging. You can, of course, come in here and type it in, and then click OK, and yeah, that's kind of cool. Or with it selected, you can come up here on the Home tab to the alignment group, and it's right there as well. Orientation, click on the drop down arrow. You can angle it clockwise, rotate the text up. Ooh, that's kind of kooky. Or you can click on the drop down arrow and format the cell alignment. Takes you right to the Format Cells window, but on the Alignment tab. And then you can come over here and type in 0, hit enter on the keyboard, and we're back to where we started. Thanks for watching. Hey, as a quick reminder, if you like my video, please give it a thumbs up. You can also click on me and subscribe to my channel to get notified of the latest videos. And for great specials on my products, please see the description below this video.